Welcome to week 2 and our lecture on mediated communication. And this is going to be quite a theory heavy lecture, and as before it's going to be broken up into different parts. So feel free to go take a break between each part and grab yourself a drink or whatever. And these, of course, will be uploaded and you'll be able to see them throughout the term. Okay, so mediated communication. And as you can see from this title slide, we're going to look at different theorists. So we talked a little bit in seminar groups about this notion of mediation. We have this idea of media and medium as being something in between. So as it says here on this slide, mediation is this chasm with a bridge over it. That's what a media or medium is. It stands in the way when we can't have perfect communication with one another. And perfect communication is described, or was described, by Ferdinand de Saussure. So this is his canonical situation of utterance. And you can see from the image here, this perfect canonical form is face-to-face, and where we take turns, so it's dyadic, so there's two people, and we take turns in listening and speaking. But, and these are the crucial bits about this canonical situation, we need to be in the same place and the same time. We need to be physically face-to-face, co-located. Now, I say that's crucial because it's possible nowadays, with the arrival of technology, to actually have a face-to-face communication, face-to-face chat, whilst we're using an electronic medium. We can use Teams, even if it is a bit ropey, or we can use Zoom, we can use Skype, Messenger, and so on. But they are not the same as this canonical situation. So the canonical one, we have to be in the same place at the same time and face-to-face with one another. And that means that we can do an awful lot of extra things. So as it explains here, in this quote, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can read through it and you can see that one of the important things here about face-to-face canonical speech situation is this ability to have the non-vocal paralinguistic features. So that means things like body language, where we can perhaps point to something that's in the room, or perhaps we can change our expression and look angry, or we can raise our eyebrows, or we can laugh, smile, shrug our shoulders, turn our head, nod, and so on. All of these paralinguistic features communicate different things. And of course, now that we have widespread electronic media, we've started to use a different form of paralinguistic features that we can use on these, on mobile phones and on computers, where we have emojis, and they are our digital version of the original paralinguistic features that we would use when we're face-to-face. So, we can then put at the end of a message a smiling face or a winking face or an angry or a sad face to help our reader actually interpret what it is we're saying, because we can't include those paralinguistic features of smiling or shrugging or whatever it is. So as this quote says, those non-vocal paralinguistic features, those extra things that we do like shrugging and our body language and so on, they are there to actually clarify the ambiguity that we might have in our words. So, we know that words can often be very ambiguous. We can often say things that can be taken in different ways. There is that ambiguity going on. And if we include the non-vocal paralinguistic features, that can then solidify and clarify exactly what it is that we are trying to communicate. So we can use different types of communication models to begin to analyse what we're looking at if we're looking at texts, but also if we're looking at recorded video of communication. So JAKOBSON'S communication model builds upon SAUSSURES. So we've still got this very simple dyadic, so two people involved. So we can see here we've got the addresser and we've got the addressee. And for JAKOBSON, this is very much about persuading people. So the addresser is the one that is saying something emotive. They are trying to persuade perhaps the addressee, so who is being addressed, and that's why we have that connotative word in there. So it's very much, well, what can we connote from this? What can we actually understand from all of the extra things that are going on in the middle? So we have context, message, contact and code. And for JAKOBSON, these different aspects have different prominence depending on what text it is we're looking at. So some will have extreme prominence. So for example, if we were looking at something like code, we might decide that it was a good idea to help us understand, for example, a tweet. We might think it was a really good idea to count how many words the person had used, or look at the specific language that they'd used, and how they'd used it. So here, this article from Linda WAUGH in Poetics Today actually expands a bit more on JAKOBSON'S theory, and particularly this idea of this poetic function. So, going through again each of those factors at the top there. So, and this is, ideally for verbal communication. So we can see there, again, we have addresser, so the person who is speaking, speaker, encoder, emitter, poet, author, narrator. So although that, it says there, any given act of verbal communication, so a speech event, it does, this particular expansion does take into account author and narrator and poet. So it may be spoken, but we can also use this particular framework to actually look at text too. So we then have the addressee, so the listener, so the person who is decoding, and decoding of course is another word for reading, and we have reader there as well. So but hearer or listener, reader or interpreter, they are our audience if we are the speaker. And then we have the next part, code. So again, as I said, we could be looking at how many words being used, what type of language, but very much this system. So is it, or as SAUSSURES uses the word lang, which, stands in or means this sort of system, formal language. Is this the formal language that we would see within medical journals, for example? Or is this legal terminology? Or are we looking at a code or a system that is only used within computing or only used online on Twitter? So all of those things, a particular system, a particular way of doing things, of communicating in a particular context. And context, you can see, is there, number 5. And of course, the context is always really crucial, because if we read something or we hear something that works in, say, the context of a tweet, it may not translate to a spoken context, the spoken system of language, or a different written system, you know, a more formal one perhaps. And they're going back to number 4. So the message itself, so the actual text, the content, if you like, you know, what has actually been said, and, you know, how has it been said, and so on. And then the last one, number 6, the contact. So this may well be physical, but, you know, this is also what we could say are those paralinguistic things. So physical channel and psychological connection between speaker and addressee. So, you know, raising eyebrows or touching somebody's arm, you know, and so on. Those types of things, that additional, as I say, the sort of the psychological, physical, but the paralinguistic things. And then, as it says, the last section there, corresponding to these 6 factors, are 6 major functions. So, you know, we have different things going on with each of those. So the emotive, and this does go back to the previous slide, the emotive there is the addressee, is the addresser, the addressee is the connotive, so the person that understands. So, you know, the emotive is the expression, who is speaking. And then the connotive, the one making sense of it, you know, is the person being spoken to. And then the metalingual, you know, and we may have words that have additional meanings, and we may also look at what the meanings are of different words. So that whole thing of glossing, of actually looking and finding out, well, is there just a single meaning to this? And also, how many words are we using? What does that mean? Where's the punctuation, and so on, if we're looking at text? All of those types of things. And then the poetic. So it says they're aesthetic. So we could actually look at how something has been laid out on the page, and that of course is particularly important when we're looking at something like poetry. You know, how the white space is being used is important, but likewise that use of space is important in books. It's also, that use of space is also important even when we talk to one another. So we might, in talking, regard that as being how a comedian perhaps uses timing and leaves gaps. You know, what does that do? And, you know, sort of slowing down and talking, perhaps, you know, if somebody is reciting poetry or, you know, reciting a piece of Shakespeare, they may well have a particular aesthetic that they use. So it's not just the language, it's actually how it's delivered. And then the next one, referential. So this is very much to do with the context. What are we looking at? Where are we? You know, what's the medium that's being used? All of these things that help us to understand what's going on. You know, what context is this in? And that, as we'll see as the term goes on, context for language in any case, but particularly within the media, is absolutely crucial, because as soon as we change the context, the meaning will change quite often. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you a little bit of this video, which is on YouTube. So, you know, you can find it on there. And as it says, we're going to start from 1:10 and think about how this works with JAKOBSON'S communication model. And then after we've done that, we'll sort of stop for a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to move it up to 1:10. There we go.
It's done. 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 No, don't save it. I'll get it later. Done! Fine.
Okay, so we'll pause it there. So that we could use JAKOBSON'S communication model, and obviously the addresser there is Alan Partridge. If you've not come across Alan Partridge before, I recommend going and having a look online and seeing some of his TV shows. And it's his particular brand of humour is very much the type where we might sort of cringe or feel badly for him, until we then sort of learn more about him and discover that actually he's a terrible, terrible person. But the fact here that we have this man standing in a car park addressing somebody that he has seen across the other side of the car park and trying to catch his attention. And the other person, we could guess, is ignoring him and pretending that he hasn't heard him and just carrying on. So, we've sort of got our context of being in a car park, out in public, but, obviously there are further contexts going on that we are perhaps not aware of, but we might be able to work it out, partly because we realise that this is comedy, and also because of the way that the two women who are there with him, the way that they look, their body language, their paralinguistic additional sort of moves. So his message, what he's actually saying is this constant shouting out of the man's name. And we could look at the poetic of that, the fact that he is shouting, that there is space in between each utterance, and that, he stops and we think he's finished, and then he goes back for another shout. And then, he ends up with saying, oh, he can't have heard me, I'll catch him later. So, sort of stepping it back for the addresser, for Alan Partridge, actually not taking it as a slight, not sort of taking it personally that he was ignored. So instead, assuming that it was just because the guy couldn't hear him. So yes, we could look at that. We could also look at where it says code, metalingual. We could look and see how many times he repeats the word Dan and what that does, and why that also then makes it very funny, because he is constantly shouting out far too many times, and most people would actually stop probably after the second or third and just like, well, they wouldn't wish to embarrass themselves. But that's part of the humour of Alan Partridge, that he doesn't stop. And he doesn't seem to realise when it's no longer appropriate for his behaviour. So as I say, we could use JAKOBSON'S communication model. We could go through each of these step by step. And, if we were going to use it for something like this, for this short clip, we would need to go through the clip minute by minute, second by second, and look at the time that each word is uttered, and produce a transcript, as I say, with all the time stamping, so that we knew when things were being said, how long the gaps were, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and I will see you in the next video, part 2, in a moment.